Here's a highlight from a recent episode of Booked on Rock. Alan Light is the author of Don't Stop, Why We Still Love Fleetwood Mac's Rumours. You Make Loving Fun is one of those songs that manages to win over even those who aren't Fleetwood Mac fans. Michelangelo Matos.
Yes.
Right? He has a great story about that.
Yeah, I love that story. Michelangelo, who's a writer in Minneapolis, talks about going to a party and somebody saying, I don't really get Fleetwood Mac. And he's like, no, you gotta understand Fleetwood Mac, and you gotta understand Fleetwood Mac, among other things, and he's written a lot about dance music, can be a dance band. That these can be there's sort of a funky thing in some of these songs, and puts on You Make Love and Fun. And the guy hears that groove and hears that bass line and is like, oh, well, okay. Yeah, I get that. I can hear that. Which is particularly fascinating because Christine McVie writes that song about her new boyfriend, who is the band's lighting director, just to add to the chaos of all of this. And yet, here's her ex-husband playing the bass line that in some ways, locks that song down, playing this fantastic bass part that gives it that propulsion, that gives it that groove that he's got to sit there and play as she's singing about this new dude that she's seeing now.
Unreal. I think
it's just none of it, makes any sense at all. And yet this is what you're left with. It's all of these ingredients. And I think somebody makes the point that if you know the story and you know the details, that's one thing. But even if you don't, you can hear these layers, this depth, this richness to whatever is going on in the studio. You feel that in these songs, that there is they're just dimensions to these performances that are coming from someplace, are coming from emotions that are banging around in that room and that are inescapable as you hear these songs.
Maybe beyond the actual skills, the musical talents is the fact that they were all able to step aside for the greater cause, to be able to say, I will record a song with my ex-wife talking about a guy she's with, and Stevie and, just saying, look, I need Lindsey. He's driving me mad. I can't stand him right now. I don't want to be in the same room with him, but I get what he's doing, his importance, and vice versa. Lindsey.
And they say that, look, whatever was going on, we knew that these songs were something really special, that something was happening. And I think there's a quote from Stevie in the book where she's like, what were we going to do? Like, we were going to quit and go start new bands? Like, that would be stupid. And I talked to Cameron Crowe for the book, who wrote the famous Rolling Stone cover story that came out at the time, very famous cover photo of the five of them in bed together. And he said, look, they, obviously the tension was what it was, and the relationships, what was happening, but they also knew what they had, and they were ready to put that out in the world. And knowing that they were, from the album title on down, knowing that leaning into this narrative and to all of the gossip column stuff and to everything that was happening inescapably was going to be part of this story. And they were not resistant to that. They were not afraid of that. They knew that they had made something great. They were committed to these songs, and whatever it took, they were going to see that through.
Defines what an artist is, putting it all into your art.
Into the work, into these songs, singing, because it's inconceivable, right? Stevie and Lindsey break up. John and Christine get divorced. Mick and his wife get divorced. Mick and Stevie have an affair.
Right.
Christine starts dating one of the crew. All of this is happening, and yet they're showing up in the studio every day, singing these songs, writing these songs, recording these songs about each other and about what they're going through, and sitting there together working this stuff out. It is unimaginable what that was. And look, that's a story. You said there was the behind the music, there was the classic albums episode. Ken Calais, who co-produced the record, he wrote a book about it. There was this play Stereophonic last year that won the Tony for best play of the year. That is a very, very mildly fictionalized version of the Rumours story, to a point that Ken Caillet ended up suing them, saying that too much of this was taken from his book, which it was. And yet, people still love this story. They still love what that is. I didn't need to write that book. I needed to do enough of the context, do enough of, you have to know what I'm talking about. But again, what I really wanted to look at was not just the making of story, but the afterlife, the legacy, and this endless popularity, and why people keep turning to it over and over and over again. The story itself, we know, is astounding and weaves its way in through all of this stuff. But also there are places to turn to be able to get that.